Welcome back to the Village Bonfire for another episode of the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. A podcast not just for your mind, but for your body and spirit too. Here we don't just talk theory. Instead, we compassionately engage with our lived experiences and a wide variety of topics together, all to invite the question, in these times we find ourselves in, how do we be more human? Thank you for being here. May these conversations awaken, inspire, repair, and evolve something deep within each of us and serve the wild, tender aliveness of our personal and collective hearts. So welcome back to another episode of the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. And so as always, we begin with lighting the candle, invoking the village fire. Ooh. Feels particularly potent today, the day after Beltane or Bealtaine, which, the day of celebrating the fire, the return, or not maybe the return of spring, but kind of that halfway point. And so, just take a few deep breaths in and out. Notice what, if anything, you are feeling in your own body. Noticing that sometimes your body may be reflecting back to you things that are happening in the land, in the earth, right? We're not separate. And so maybe you even start to just expand your senses gently wherever you are listening into the space around you, noticing sounds or smells, tastes, textures, temperatures, colors. Perhaps noticing how that interplays your body and the environment, how the environment shifts maybe how you feel, and how you feel maybe affects the environment, or at least how you perceive the environment. And sometimes that might feel challenging, and sometimes that might feel beautiful and nourishing, and there's no right or wrong, but we just acknowledge that. How interconnected we are with other people, with the world around us, with the earth, with all our beyond human kin, the stars, everything in between. And so we say, thank you, thank you, thank you. And so I'm super excited today to have Sionnáin with me. And so, before we kind of get into introducing Sionnáin, who is a song carrier and sort of a medicine, channels medicine songs, often in Gaeilge, in Irish language, although not always, but often. Gonna invite her to actually open the space for us today with a song, so that that experience of what she channels is sort of present around our fire and in our medicine space before we kind of get into introducing her a little bit more. So we'll let the power of the song speak through. So Sionnáin, welcome. Fáilte.
Gur míle maith agat. Yeah, Anna sásta bheith ann. Really happy to be here, and Banachtaí Bealtaine gach duine. Blessings on this Bealtaine threshold is potent. time that we've stepped into. This song that I feel called to share it's really calling upon our ancestors. So in Irish, a way of saying that is sin share. So sin share would be ancestor, and then sin sheri is like plural, a word for ancestors. And so this came through me at Bridget's Well, which is in Éire near the Hill of Uisneach. And of course, Bealtaine is connected with Uisneach. That's where we light the Bealtaine fire every year for the last thousands of years. So yeah, it feels like, soon we will go there. We'll be there on Saturday to light the fire. But also this prayer that moved through at Samhain, in Samhain being a time where we really remember our ancestors, but also it feels like really wholesome and important that we carry that thread through and bring that guidance and presence and support through as we light the fire and we pray for the blessing of the land and the blessing of our hearts and our homes. So yeah, so I invite you as I sing this to connect with your ancestors, with your lineage, with those who have walked this path of beauty before you and who have laid the foundations for where we are today. And you can connect with perhaps both lineages, those that you know, those that you don't know. It's just really an invitation to call upon them, to connect with them, to pray with them and to them, and also welcoming in the gifts and the wisdom that they carry, and yeah, praying for their spirits as well in the other world.
Thank you for welcoming our ancestors, our lineages into the space around the fire. Níl maithagad. So yeah, so I first met Sionnáin actually through the program Songs of Mother Europe, which I've been taking and supporting, and my friend Hannah, and then through one of her offerings, I ended up feeling called. I've been on a journey. Some of you listening may have heard me sort of speak about this before. That although my ancestry is definitely kind of a good old North American mutt mix of like a lot of different threads from different areas of Europe. Sort of that American melting pot. Yeah, my Irish ancestry has been kind of calling to me, and the land started coming up in dreams and calling to me, and so I've been sort of following that thread, and so I took one of Sionnáin's online offerings, songlines of Éiriú, and yeah, I just found really beautiful connection in the way that she guides people on sort of these journeys, and holds a frequency that's really of the land and of Éiriú, the sovereignty goddess, and we'll probably get a little bit more into that. But anyway, so I was really excited to just invite her to come and to speak, and have a conversation with us around the fire. And yeah, I'm just really excited to see what unfolds, because I think, in these times that we're in, there's something in us that feels so deeply, deeply hungry, like this deep yearning for yeah, for a deeper connection with the land, or for some sense of ourselves in that wider universe that feels more nourishing and more um, healthy and more supportive than I think what a lot of our cultures have sort of taught us, how they've taught us to see the world and think about the world. And language and story and song are such a part of how we learn to see things and think about things and understand things. And so I really love part of what Sionnáin brings forward is sort of this like channeling these other ways of remembering, through song, through language, through land. So anyway, thrilled to have her. So yeah, her bio is Sionnáin is a musician, songstress, quantum therapist, and water carrier from the west of Ireland. She walks with her last name, Shannon, which has been a catalyst for a deep journey with the River Shannon and with her matriarchal line. Her path is devoted to honoring, celebrating, and remembering with the Tuatha Dé Danann, and she is a channel and vessel for this ancient medicine. And through her deepening relationship, communing with the land, she has found her path woven with and in service to the awakening of the songlines of Ireland. She does this by visiting sacred sites, particularly wells, rivers, and waters of Éire, invoking the Irish language, landscape, and imbas forosmi through her songs, chants, and invocations. Sionnáin has a deep connection to Éiriú, which is deeply felt to listeners during song sharing, invoking and activating deep remembrances in them. So, welcome.
Wow, Carmel, good. Yeah, geez, it's quite something when you hear somebody read your bio. It's like, wow, who is that human?
Yeah.
But yeah, wow, I'm really honored and humbled, and yeah, just feeling the gratitude to be here and to be able to share in more deeply the journey that I am called to be on. And so yeah, Díomh Carja, hello, friends and those tuning in. Yes, Misha, Sionnáin, Michelle, Shannon, Catherine, Grace, Lynch, McGrath, Jordan. So I have woman of many names. I am. Even at birth, my mother was like, give me 2 extra names, which was, I think, quite a good sign was a good beginning among my journey. So yeah, and I'm really grateful to be here with you now. And yeah, as mentioned there, I walk with my last name, which is huge more and more every day, I see how much this is such a deep part of my medicine. And when I say that, I mean the medicine that I receive from living and breathing and walking this earth and this path, and then also the medicine that I offer from that experience of receiving the medicine. And I suppose that feels like a big part of the arc or the cycle of this path, is that you get given the medicine and then you pass on the medicine, and this is like the lineage of, the Mana Fasa, the wise women, and the carriers of medicine of different types, whether that's the medicine of the plants or the medicine of the songs or the medicine of the stories. So yeah, there's so many different layers to what medicine is. And I suppose some of us, maybe we are introduced to medicine originally as like not maybe being of the earth and of the land, or that we actually walk with it. So for me, that's such a beautiful journey that I'm on now, is of living and breathing this medicine, and through song and through sitting at the fire and being in ceremony and in harmony with the cycles on the earth. And so yeah, so that's really, I suppose, the path that I'm on at the moment, is very much so, yeah, in service to the remembrance of all of these threads being woven together.
Yeah, I think one of the things I love about that concept of medicine, too, is that, we come to medicine because something, quote unquote, went wrong. We come to medicine because there was some kind of wounding or some imbalance that wants to be like brought back again. And so part of why I love the concept of medicine too, like the path being our journey, being medicine, and then that, and then informing the medicine that we then have to offer the world or other people in our lives or whatever, is that, for me anyway, it kind of puts in context the things that happened to me that at the time didn't feel so great. Because it's like those can either be pain and poison and I can stay victim to them, or I can let them point me in a direction that maybe I wouldn't have chosen to go on my own from my head, but ultimately like has brought me deeper into like, oh, maybe this is actually my truest essence, and like maybe this is like that deepening of like, what is the truest essence of the world and what is the truest essence of me, and how do those things, like, where do those meet in a beautiful like meeting in a good way.
Yeah,
and yeah, so is there anything then that you want to share? You've sort of begun introducing yourself in sort of less of the bio way. Is there anything then from your journey that feels like it wants to be shared, kind of in that framework of like how it brought you to the River Shannon and to these songs and to being a water carrier and and a songstress and a quantum therapist and all of the other things.
yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so I suppose like the work that I do now is really woven with these three triskells, is how I see them. So it's like the lineage, the landscape, and the language. So that's really what I'm weaving with, and what is weaving through me, and what I'm responding to, those whispers that I receive. So I suppose going back to what I touched on earlier, like my lineage that I know of, they're all from the west of Ireland, so like the kind of most westerly point you can go, so the right tip of County Clare, Conte an Clara Gaeilge. And yeah, so my mother, she walks with the name Shannon. So Shannon is also the largest river in Ireland, England, Wales, Scotland. And my father's last name is Jordan, so another one of the biggest rivers in the world. Now, it was only just over 3 years ago that I really like landed into what that meant through an imbas journey that maybe I can touch on a little bit more later, around what that is and what that really looks like. So yeah, that journey, because I had already begun, drinking from the wells and singing at the waters, like, and always had such a deep connection with the Ishka, with the water. Like my mom would have to like coax me out of the water and like kind of things when I was a child. So I think for a lot of us, like this kind of path is like when we remember our childhood days, usually there's lots of clues in there as to what was, our highest excitement, like per moment, kind of what really like brought out that joy in our hearts and in our souls. So so in my lineage, like that's where I suppose, both my mother and my father, the names, and I suppose the piece around that I learned from a dear friend, John Crossan, who does a lot of work here in Ireland with the tree walk, and is a medicine man and an elder in my eyes. He's not that old, but he's older than I am, and definitely wiser. But he told me all around that time, basically, of the imbas journey with my dear sister Laura Murphy, that our last names were like traditionally in Ireland, and I suppose also if you look at other cultures, I'm no expert of that, but like often in other cultures people are known by their last name. It's actually like the way it would be, and here in Ireland that was very practiced in especially rural areas. And so you would have had like, oh, Smith down the road, no one would have said like, oh, Michael Smith, because everyone would have known Smith, and it was like, I guess, made more sense to swiftly say that. And then also he probably would have been the blacksmith. So like also there was clues in the name as to like the medicine that you carried, maybe not as like obvious as Smith all the time. You might have to dig a bit or look, then to the language, because when you look at a lot of the names in Irish, or even the place names, when you translate them into Irish, they're way deeper than like the anglicized version, so the version of Béarla of English. So for me then, walking with my mother's name, because my mother and father never married, and my mom moved to England to birth me, so therefore I've always had my mother's last name, but then also I suppose experienced through that journey, through the time, like I was born in 1990, so although that's like, I mean, it's not that long ago, but also still in Ireland there was a lot of shame, and still, that presence of just not really being welcome if you were having a child, as they would have said, out of wedlock, which is, without being married. And so my mom went across the waters, as did many women. And, here in Ireland at the moment, there's so much being uncovered and spoken into around the mother and baby homes and Magdalene laundries and all of that was very much so covered up and not tended to, and not really honored in a good way. Now, luckily, my mother wasn't in one of those homes, but she did have to leave, she felt she did. And so, so she gave birth to me over there in Hastings in East Sussex, and, would have lived on her own in a bedsit. And had quite a challenging, I suppose, both pregnancy and birth, as one can imagine, with being a woman on your own in a country that you don't know, but like you feel like you need to be there to be able to carry out what you feel called to. So I suppose my early days were very much so nomadic, in a sense that my mom moved many times, I think at least up to 6 times before I was even 2. And then I think it was about a year and a half, my mom says, when we moved back to Ireland, back to Dublin, and stayed with her friend. And then anyway we got a house in Galway, so I would have been raised then from, say, whatever, like about 1.5 up until I was about 10 in Galway, just outside the city. And then moved to Clare at around 10, moved to like a different part of Clare, Ennis, which is like a town, and then from there back to West Clare. So that's when I moved back to where all my ancestors that I know of are from. And spent the rest of my time then right up until I left secondary school in West Clare. So so all of those journeys, I suppose, wove in a way that like I never knew my father, so I always had this like quite strong connection with my mother's line. And with my mother being also the only one in her family, because she was the youngest. She was born in Reha, like in the house back on like where the Shannon actually flows out into the water, into the ocean rather. And so so she would have always kind of shared stories around that and around her childhood and different things. And I would have been to that land a lot as a child as well to visit, although I never met my grandparents either. So I suppose there was a lot of connection with my mom's line, and then like not really knowing so much about my father's line. And then with being also no brothers or sisters, and just growing up as and as they say, when you've no brothers or sisters, they call you an only child. But like when I was younger, I used to say I'm a lonely child, which like my mom used to be like, no, you're an only child. I'm like, yeah, no, but I'm like, I had a great imagination. I played games all the time and just like be creating worlds and singing. I was always singing and different things. But it was definitely challenging for me and for my mom. And like I think that those moments, like when you're young, and like I probably grew up quite quickly, I would say, when I look back at my younger days, although I had a great imagination and different things, like I would have been in foster care at like 6 for like at least a year. So I lived with loads of different families. And when you're that age, like it's quite a big deal if you're not at home. It's also, it feels like a lot if you also just like don't have a father. You start to realize these kind of things. Obviously I do, but he's not in your life. Go through different phases of, I suppose, accepting, of like being angry about it, and then wondering, are they going to come and arrive on like a white horse, the whole imagination part of it, and then realize, oh, no one's coming, like no, that's just like. And so there's like memories, I suppose, now with all of what I've walked and seen, that I definitely went through a very early kind of like seeing that the world, as in this way of being, society and how we live, isn't all roses, and I wasn't like in that kind of fairy tale place for probably very long because of my circumstances. But I feel like in more recent years, like I feel like I get to, like I feel more like a child now than I did, I think, when I was a child. Not saying that I didn't have beautiful moments as a child, because I definitely did. But I suppose, it's just different when you grow up with your mom. It feels like she was like my sister, and that like I was also kind of like her mother sometimes, because she was actually also really struggling, and struggles with addiction and different things now as well. So it's been quite a path of probably just feeling very alone. And then like when you feel very alone, you just almost like naturally you go very inward, and you do this whole deep journey, and then you're compelled to seek support. Like you need to like find something here to like commune with, to actually like support you along the way. So it's been quite a deep journey. I suppose the youthful time of my life was I think there was lots of initiations and lots of lots of sadness and grief and confusion, and like really I think my generation particularly, and even maybe the generation below me as well, I feel like we came in with a very clear vision and mission of like, I'm not going to allow the same patterns to play out. And so we're really like here to speak truth and to break that cycle. And I can look back at my life and know that is true. And like my mom would say things to me about how I used to have such a strong intuition about different people, and I would say things to her
Mm,
sometimes about friends of hers that I just didn't feel like safe with them. And then they
mm,
apparently later, she wouldn't listen to me, but apparently later it would turn out that that was true and things. So I think, when you go through those experiences, and also when you come in like as a soul with a very clear mission,
mhm.
it doesn't really matter what's going to happen, because you're going to do it. Like the mission is the mission and you're here to honor it. So yeah,
Mm,
so that's kind of been, I suppose, the weaving of my journey and the
yeah.
name and kind of that path.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So one of the things I was like really present to as you were speaking is, and it was sort of coming up for me as I was listening to the first song that you kind of helped bring us into this space through, was that invoking of the ancestors and sort of the calling to them. And I was really present as I was listening to you, of kind of like, yeah, almost this beauty, this tenderness, this warmth that felt like it was coming in. And then with that, I then started to feel like some grief and some tears. But for many years, I really struggled with the idea of connecting with my ancestors, because I would look back at the lines. I think, some of what you were just speaking to, that idea of like, yeah, feeling that calling to break some of these old patterns. And it was really tricky for me to feel like I could look back and see any kind of wisdom or see any medicine in the lineage, because I would look back and just see trauma, and you know, yeah, and so it's yeah, so I guess, is there anything, what has that, I'm hearing how much maybe the music and stories and just your own like sense of calling, and then maybe also connecting with the land, and kind of helped anchor you in these times when maybe you weren't feeling some of that anchoring from the adults in your life, or things felt really in flow and kind of, um but yeah, what how have you been able to kind of reconcile or repair or find a different relationship to your lineage, when your lineage was filled with sort of these hurts, these traumas, these complexities, right? And because now it feels like you're, yeah, such a clear channel in many ways for some of that coming through. So where's that turning point, or some turning points of that for you?
Yeah. Um, well, I feel like, going back to my younger days, like I can see myself in my room, like with the keyboard and the singing. And, so I think as children, we naturally create worlds where we are safe. We create the
Hmm.
spaces that
Hmm.
we long for and that we need, and we have such vivid imaginations, that we
Mm,
create them. And I think as adults we can sometimes forget those parts of ourselves, or we just get
mm,
so weathered from it all that we're like, actually it don't, and there's so many sometimes, I suppose, expectations put upon us, and that would have been a little bit of my story, I suppose. Would be, I would come from, I suppose, yeah, I guess it would definitely be a middle class kind of family. So, I would have been expected to do certain things, like be a teacher. And, I kind of tried to do all those things. Um, as in, I applied, I got the points, I went, and then I did like 1 year. And I remember being in university, and like friends of mine from school were with me, and I was like looking around at them, and I could tell that they were having a great time, and like I just
mm,
wasn't like, and that
mm.
was like a pattern for me, I suppose, like moving home here where I am now, actually, which is another story for another day. But um, there's so many stories. But like, yeah, moving back here was huge for me at that. Like at the
Mm,
time that I moved, I was 11. So I was after I had started my bleed, just before moving here. And I remember coming to this house where I'm in now. My mom and her husband built this house, and oh, I just knew that this was going to be really, I didn't like know on a cognitive level, but I knew it was going to be like really deep journey. And that would have been, I suppose, as well, if you think about rites of passage, you know, that was such a huge rite of passage. I moved back to the home of where all my ancestors that I know of came from. But also had no connection, you know, with my father. But he actually, at that time when I moved here, lived not far from me. But I never, so I had this whole sense always of like knowing that my ancestors were here, but also not knowing them, in another sense. And then, you know, he passed on. It was 2006. So I was 16 then, and yeah, I suppose in those years after he passed, I experienced something that I had experienced once with my aunt, my mom's sister, which was this communing with spirit that I hadn't actually experienced really in a tangible way before that. But I suppose in my mom's journey, I would see that she has really struggled to get over the passing of her parents and her sister, and you know, so grief, I think in all of us can be really strong, and it is really strong when it comes to our ancestors, because often we feel like they left too soon. We never got to know them well, or they're not here for these moments in our lives. And so I think in that way, when we miss people or when we feel we need them, we learn, and we're called to like invoke them, you know. So we have all these different rituals and these different days where we celebrate them in particular. But I suppose if we really want to weave that connection with our ancestry, then we need to like actually connect with them, either by walking on the lands where they are, or praying to them and with them, and often for them. So like that would have been my relationship with my father, was really accessing that place of forgiveness for him not showing up in any of the ways that I deemed to be like what I needed, you know, and realizing it's actually less about me and more about like how that can be healed, you know. And so once that was felt in me, that real genuine heartfelt compassion and forgiveness for who he was as a human and how he was and wasn't able to show up for me, then that relationship, it felt like opened. And so, you know, I've had that really beautiful journey with him of like, I feel more connected with him than I do with really anyone, I would say, even with my mother in it. It's a different type of connection. But I suppose, yeah, with him in that way, and, you know, going through all of the grief when he passed, and my mom being so confused about why I was even upset. She couldn't understand, you know, like, what, like, you never even knew him, what's wrong with you? Like, she didn't know what to do with me, you know. And she, at that time, actually brought me to the local parish priest. My mom would be a very religious woman, and that's really supported her, you know, her connection with prayer and with God. And of course her name's Bernadette, so that's like, she's very connected with the Saint Bernadette and all of that. But I remember we went back to the priest's house, and like I was just like couldn't stop crying for ages, you know. I was kind of in that cycle. And he said something quite like profound, really, you know. And he was like, well, you know, because I had been to the funeral home and all those kinds of things, but I didn't go to the actual funeral mass. And I was like thinking that maybe that's why I was so upset. And he said, well, no, actually, because, you know, he obviously heard the backstory, and he goes, well, you know, you're actually beginning your relationship with your father now, now that he's passed. And like, I remember, you know, there's these moments where people say things to you and you're like, oh, wow. And like, even though I was only 16, like I got it, like on a bodily level, but I definitely didn't know the depth of what that would mean. So I feel like, yeah, with the passing of my father, it liberated me in a way. It liberated him, and it really was that probably first tangible connection to spirit and to communing with an essence and a presence that like isn't on the earth, but like, you know, that is part of you, like you know, that co-created you like into being. So So I think that was like my first like a connection with, I suppose, someone who has passed over and crossed over to the other side and deepening that connection. But I suppose with the kind of medicine that I walk with now and with my song carrying and the water carrying and all those journeys, like all of that weaves back to like the Hill of Uisneach, and my journey there on, which would have been summer solstice. It's now 9 years ago since I stepped foot on that magical blessed land. Yeah, and so yeah, so that's been like a journey beyond even my knowing, but I suppose through that presence there, and like it was just like a whole other way of being opened up to me in that time. And since then I feel like I've been like following the threads of that path, and yeah, it feels like from probably around that time, like a lot of that journey was also in really like healing the kind of the presence of the trauma in my life that was connected to like the story, the story of me like as a human, and like actually like remedying that and like finding the balm for those wounds that were in me and the pain that I walked with, and that arriving through like the medicine and the relationship with the wells and with the elders and with the wisdom keepers that I was blessed to sit with and to hear stories from, and just to see they're actually like really strong embodied connection, and to not really know much about it, but to feel like that's a way that I can walk. And it's a way that I haven't seen being like modeled, let's say, to me before, but it was like showing me another way, and my soul and my heart like just continued to follow that, in different meandering ways, like, and yeah, the path just continues to unravel and unfold in so much beauty. And it's also though brings up like the beauty and the grief, they're interwoven, they're fitchifu. So I suppose within that though, and that path, I feel like there's been more and more of a stepping out of like this personal story, although I know it's the foundation for who I am in some ways and where I am from, but also in terms of like the ancestors. Like for me, it's like connecting. Yeah, I have my lineage, and there's a lot of like, there's a lot of healing needed in the lineage, and that's why we show up in the way we do to like pray with them. It's like often you're praying for the support as well of the well ancestors, the ones who actually walked in a way of beauty and who knew the ways of the land and honored the traditions. And then there's also an acknowledging, I feel, of the ones who are deeply hurt, and they carry so much trauma themselves, and like that also, I suppose, can't be dismissed, I feel. But sometimes it can be a lot to go into, but I suppose for me, I feel like that was just happening anyway, but without the tools to actually know how to navigate it. But then with the journey of Uisneach and all of the different threads that kind of just started to be woven, I was like seeing like grandparents, and I was finding lots of mothering figures that were like showing me ways that I can mother myself. Really, that's really what, in those moments, maybe when I was with them, I was probably feeling mothered by them. But when I look back now, I can see that they were actually showing me how I could mother myself, how I could teach myself these ways and listen to my own inner compass, which is so alive, and it's so alive in all of us, that like direction and knowing where we're going, and with whom. And so yeah, so it's a journey that just keeps getting more and more profound, I feel. But yeah, and I think then that's the piece with the journey of Uisneach opened up this part, which I feel has been the piece that has really offered me this solid foundation, which is my connection with the Tuatha Dé Danann, the tribe of Danu, and the goddesses and gods, but I would say more so the goddess energy of this land of Éiriú. And so that was all and is all still flowing very much so through me. And I suppose like when we go really far back in our lineages, we can feel that there was these beings who tended the wells and sat around the fire. And yeah, so like even in a more recent song that I have, which is connected with the grandmothers that was born out of a keening weekend I was at in Kerry, that feels, because I never knew either my grandparents. I do feel my mother's grandmother more and more, and I have, I suppose, spent more time connecting with her. But actually, it feels like that song is very much so calling on like the grandmother archetype, you know. So I feel like when we look back in our lineages, there's all these, you know, threads that are way more ancient than like our family tree, for example. You know? But so like connecting with those qualities, especially when I suppose one doesn't have maybe a guardian or a parent that models particular values or particular even, you know, structures or things, you know, then like you're kind of really without a reference point then when you don't have, you know, that kind of solid mother, father, home, like kind of base. But so then like that was a part, I suppose, as a human, as a young woman, that I just didn't have that, you know. And so through my reconnection and remembering with the land and with the cycles and with the wells and with, you know, these goddesses like Bridget, like she has been, like she's my, you know, this is Bridget here on the wall, and the art by Courtney Davis. But Bridget, like, you know, she's guardian of the wells, tender of the fire. You know, she was a goddess, poet, healer, seer, blacksmith, alchemist, just like, and continues to be this bridge, you know, for us all. I feel like even through like the kind of say Celtic, pre-pagan, I would feel even, and the Catholic religion, you know, or way of being, she continues to bridge us, you know, always, and bringing us together. And so like she would be one of the goddesses that I really deeply feel, like I feel her with me, and that's very comforting in times of you know, worry or despair or any of those human emotions that we, you know, we just feel them. And so it's really important, I feel, when we think about our ancestors and our guardians, that we think beyond our lineages, you know, because really they are also beyond blood, kin. And for me, I really got shown that because I only knew one side of that. And so a lot of the people who appeared into my life were not related to me by blood. Like my mother's husband is my dad. I don't like, I call him dad, and but he's not related to me by blood at all, but we have a deep connection, and that connection also is strong, and in the way it is, like, well, for many reasons, but it's also very much so connected with my mom and her addiction, because we've had to come together. So often like these things that appear as like, oh my gosh, that's really like too hard, or I can't, what am I, you know, but there's always gold in it. There's always a gift that will land at some point along the way. So.
Yeah, as you've been speaking, I mean, I love that piece, and you know, and I'm hearing, that thread of like sometimes we actually have to lose something to like start to build a relationship with like what was actually there all along, or what could have been there but just wasn't. And then this piece that you're bringing forward about kind of there's like our human self, our sort of small personality self, and its like direct lineage and sort of its experience of the world. And then there's like our soul self, or sort of this more expanded vision self that's like deeply interwoven with a world that's far vaster than sort of that like one thread of our family tree, as you put it, you know. And so
Yeah.
I love that you're sort of you know, naming that as being, yeah, as being this thing. And I think, you know, I think we had more of a sense of that when we had more of a village, right? And I know in Ireland there are still sort of that, there is still a little bit more of that tradition of village, you know. It's still a little more alive and well and remembered. And um you know, and there are places in the US where I would say that's also still kind of true, like still sort of that small town, like people know each other and kind of look out for each other. And, you know, and that can have its downsides, but yeah, but that idea that it's not all on a nuclear family to nourish us, and that there's this wider web, not only of people and roles, but then also of culture, of language, of like, it kind of opens it up so that our understanding is that we are mothered, fathered, nurtured, developed through like the way all these different forces kind of move through our lives and shape us, you know. And um yeah, that's at least some of what I was kind of hearing in sort of what you were sharing. Yeah. um
Yeah, I suppose
and
that's the kind of just thinking of the, you know, the Tuatha. So like
mhm,
Tuatha is like tribe, you know,
mhm,
and Tuatha Dé Danann then is like the tribe of Danu, really is where that originates from. So the Tuatha Dé Danann were like this, you know, known as like the ever living ones, or the bright and shining ones, or
mhm,
they were like the, you know, the mythical superhuman race of beings. So like, you know,
mhm,
Bridget would be of that Tuatha. Danu is like the mother goddess, but then we have Danu rippling through lots of other lineages as well. That's like quite a universal
mhm,
connection. And like Éiriú, then like Éiriú, the goddess of sovereignty, which Éire is named after,
mhm.
and she
Era being
rests.
Ireland.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Mhm,
she's resting underneath Alnamurin, which is like the stone of the divisions. And it's also this meeting place. It's Midja. It's the fifth province. It's like this portal into, you know, the other realm or the other
mhm,
world. Um, so yeah, when we think of like Tuha and tribe, and like when I see my community now, and I look around, and although we're like probably more fragmented and we're living like
mhm,
all over Ireland and beyond,
mhm,
like there are qualities and gifts that are being offered and being, like, I suppose, really embodied by different beings and hearts. And there's a, you
mhm,
know, beautiful weaving then of those threads happening. And like, I know from my journey, most of the people that I'm really connected to, I met through one way or another through the Hill of Ushnak. So
mhm,
for me, that was such a, yeah, it was such a return and a reclamation of my own
mhm,
sovereignty. But like, it didn't happen overnight. Like, you know,
mhm,
it's been
mhm,
like a journey. And I suppose for me, because you know, I tried to walk another path, that like the path that my mother's dream for me, or like my, you
mhm,
know, or the idea of what I should do, or those kind of things. I think, like, for me, like, it's been such a journey of like trying to like actually really leave that like behind as well,
mhm, mhm,
in a way, because life is, yeah, there's lots of different needs that we have as humans, and
mhm,
there's things that we can do. And you know, it's yeah, it's quite a journey when you don't have anyone in your family maybe necessarily showing that way. And
mhm,
so it requires like a lot of strength and resilience. And yeah, it's just definitely a lot when you're walking that way. But I can see, you know, from even tuning in before today, like when I think back to those times when I was here, as like a teenager, and I was like being bullied because of my hair and because I was different to everyone, because people didn't know who I was. Like in the country in Ireland, they would call people like a blow-in, you know. So even though all my ancestors are from this area, I moved here at 11. No one knew who I was. I had red hair, like, and traditionally women with red hair were just, you know, like we all know the stories of what happened to women. They were, you know, excluded from their communities, often women who were said to be wise women, not always, but like within the last window of time, because of Catholic religion and all of those things. So there's been a lot of, and there's still a lot of healing like happening in those spaces. But I suppose when you're like put into a position where you're completely excluded from your community, and you don't really have one, and then, you know, you have to go through this whole journey of figuring out why that is and what's going on, and like, you know, through, I suppose, the absolute knowing in your being that like this is where I'm meant to be. And, you know, when you start to meet people though then that actually also are experiencing similar journeys, and that like also have a shared vision of being around the fire and honoring the children to come, and being in relationship in a good way with the earth and reciprocity, and, you know, those kind of ways. For me, that's been really like quite a homecoming to feel that. And like in that, like I'm always returning just like deeper and deeper to the land and to the waters, and like going to the wells, you know, I tending to them. I'm drinking well water for years and years now, and I feel like that's a huge part of my journey of remembrance and of connecting to my own inner well, because like we're mostly water and earth. And so, you know, how we commune with the elements is a huge part of how we are, and the energy that we then share with people and places. And I suppose, that journey for me with my father, as I mentioned earlier, and even with my mother, has, I think, helped also to heal that kind of connection, I suppose, and dissonance with other family members, both past and present, who I feel maybe, you know, didn't model those ways, because like it requires that energy of Bridget. It's like that energy of compassion, but also like seeing beyond the kind of parts of people in our lives or people in our families that hurt us or that we feel upset by, and actually seeing like, but they still have gifts, and we all actually do. And, you know, those threads in our lineages where like people in our lives, like say, you know, mothers not being able to really mother their children, is often because they weren't mothered either. Or they were abused, and so therefore they abused people, you know. And remembering that humanness is actually within us all, that potential to be loving and to be kind and gentle and caring is within all of us, but so too are the parts that can actually hurt others. And usually all we're all really like crying out for is the love, and is compassion, and for someone to really hold us through all of what we feel. But I think even though sorry, go ahead.
No, just gonna say, when we have those needs met somewhere else, when we're experiencing those needs met, then it takes some of the pressure. It's easier, I find it's easier to feel compassion for the ones in our lives who maybe quote unquote should have been able to give us that but couldn't, you know. And it's like, because oftentimes we end up feeling at odds then with our needs, which are very valid: the need to feel loved, the need to feel supported, the need to receive some sort of mirroring from the people around us in ways that help us develop our gifts, rather than tell us who they think we should be, or who they think we are, or who they need us to be or want us to be, or whatever, right? And you know, and so I actually often find those archetypes to be so powerful in that sense, because they can hold a little bit more. I mean, you know, it depends. Stories are filtered. Stories are told by the people telling them, right? So they can be filtered and sort of twisted. And that's, you know, I think part of the reclamation, right? It's fascinating to hear how many prayers or songs, or, you know, like particularly in Ireland, you know, you have these sort of like pre-pagan, pre-Celtic, and then you kind of have the stories that then have sort of the Catholic layers, and then, you know, and so there's often a lot of layers that we kind of have to filter through to arrive in an essence of something. And I suspect that's a similar journey you go on sometimes with the songs too, you know, that we have sort of the ancestral folk songs, but many of them have, you know, may still carry some of those threads of sort of that pagan, druidic, you know, pre-Celtic kind of flavor. And then they may also have some of the Catholic flavor, or, you know, a Northern Ireland Protestant, but, you know, yeah, there may be some more of these than, you know, everything gets kind of filtered and shifted. And that's, you know, I've heard people talk before about, like our myth and our song, our culture as, yeah, it comes like it was developed in relationship with the land, but then it also evolves through us. And so there's kind of this like, how do we kind of bring some of those, like trust our intuition and bring some of those archetypes back to something that's more rooted in the land again, rather than rooted in something that has become more disconnected from the land, or something that wasn't native to the place, right? Like Catholicism was not necessarily native to Ireland at the time that it came, you know. And so it's like finding those places where where the myths are still deeply connected with the land, you know. And I suspect that's part of why Uisneach has been such like, carries such power as a place, because the myth, the song, the land are all still so deeply connected. And so when you get there and you tap into that energy, there's there's a purity to those archetypes that then they can like mother us, father us, guide us, elder us in ways that maybe some of the humans in our lives can't, because they're still deeply connected with like that family tree, that sort of more personality self kind of thread of things, instead of sort of that like wider, more universal, like what it is to be human kind of thread in this like larger world kind of thread of things. And I heard someone speak one time, you know, part of why, like, there's a lot of different ways we can work with plant medicines, for example. And part of why so many people feel called to the Amazonian plant medicines is that that tradition still has a lot of intactness, and has been so worked with for so long that it's built up its own energy. It's like there's this force field around those medicines that they feel stronger, and they're easier for people to kind of tap into, and the consciousness of the plants is like more powerful and more easily accessible for us, because there's such every time someone has been in relationship with it, that's built the energy field of relationship. And so, you know, it's interesting how many people, whether they have Celtic, Irish, Scottish, whatever ancestors or not, how many people around the world feel a connection to some of more of the Celtic archetypes and myths. And I think some of that is because, in spite of some of these other layers, and in spite of sort of a very complicated history in terms of religion and politics and borders and, you know, like colonization and all of that kind of stuff, there is still this like that powerful force field. There is still a certain level of like intactness that I also feel like is being even more reclaimed and even more tapped into. And so, you know, I'm aware of our time, but I mean, I would love to, you know, you sort of touched a little bit on imbas, like the practice of imbas and the tradition of imbas. And, you know, you've talked a little about the Triskel and, you know, the songs, the waters, the stories, the land. But yeah, I guess what traditions maybe, or what of those sort of like powerful practices do you feel have like, been practiced for thousands of years that have kind of, that still feel very alive for you, or have been really, you know, feel like, they've been part of this journey for you?
Yeah. Yeah, well, so really the imbas is, I feel, is the portal into these wells of wisdom that are held, within the land. So um yeah, like the Tuatha Dé Danann, as I mentioned earlier, like the ever living ones, so they never went anywhere. That's the whole journey of the Tuatha Dé Danann, is that although they did walk the earth, and many thousands of years ago, but then they went in under the mounds, and they went into the wells, and they really went into our landscape, as guardians, as keepers of this wisdom, and like it's been preserved in the land. And we have so many hawthorn trees just scattered all around the land. And like, really, I suppose for many, because of the folklore around the sacredness of the hawthorn tree, and that all of these stories of what might happen to one if they were to like cut it down or something, like people, even farmers who really want to like make the most of the land, and like agriculturally use the space, like they won't cut them down, because they know, or they fear the story. They mightn't tell you, to your face that they believe in the fairies, but they obviously do, like, because if they didn't, they wouldn't, and there's lots of stories around people who did actually, attempt to cut them down, and different things happened. But yeah, so I feel like for Ireland, like it's an Éire, there's like, I know there isn't time to go into it now, but like there's the whole story around how Éiriú, asked for the land to be named after her. That was part of the agreement. So there was an agreement made, that the land would be named in her honor. And so in that way, even though we now often call it Ireland if we're speaking in English, but Éire and that essence is still imbued in the land. So, through the language, particularly through the Gaeilge, and this is the same, I feel, in all cultures, is that when we speak the most original language that we know of the land, that's so alive in the landscape, in the stones, in the waters, in the mounds. And so we're really invoking, like it's almost like you're bringing, invoking means like you literally bring it into being, into the space in that moment. So if you call, upon Éiriú, or you call upon the Ishka, and even just that vibration of Ishka, it's really evocative. Like you can feel it in your body. It's like it feels like water to me. It's like it beyond, like water is also obviously a word that we've imbued with a lot of energy. But yeah, the imbas is an ancient, they say, Irish practice, as far as I'm aware, that the bards would have used, the song carriers, the poets, the seers, and it is a way of accessing this wisdom. It can be known as divine illuminated wisdom, but really what it's about is about, I suppose, really being a channel and a vessel for the wisdom that wishes to pour through you. So I suppose, yeah, that kind of wisdom is mostly, not connected with one's personal story, and is more about the medicine and the energy of that land. So that for me, since I had the journey at solstice, that would have been 2019, I feel like it was moving through me before that in some ways, but then it really came alive through Ever Rose and her transmission of the imbas, and all of what unfolded and followed that, which was so much, came flowing through me then. Because I feel like when we know as well a name, and we know that, like, that's like, there's such power in naming things, even in ourselves, of like, this is imbas, this is my connection with the goddess. And then like slowly integrating that into our beings, and finding that goddess within us, finding that well of wisdom that lies within us. But the access point is often like through the actual wells, and like we see so much reflected like in our waters. Like the waters carry all the memory of all of life, and that includes the joy. Like you go to a bubbling brook or like a stream, and it like evokes a certain energy. So if you're sitting by that stream, you're going to probably, if you have the space to receive a song that is probably quite playful, if you go to another place where maybe it's, there's a sense of sadness or grief, you might channel some kind of lament, but really, I suppose from what I see with that kind of accessing that wisdom, a big part of it is about creating the spaciousness in the body and like actually feeling safe, and feeling that you can trust your own knowing of what is coming through you, but also feeling safe and that you can trust the place where you are. And like that is quite a deep journey, and it's not one that I would recommend people just dive into, without having any kind of knowing of how to approach, or like when to, or maybe like going with somebody, like there's just different elements to it, like, and it can be, it's really important to approach in a good way. And like, I suppose what I mean by that is like, if you're going into a sacred site or a sacred place, that it's really good to introduce yourself. My friend Aoife would often say, like, you wouldn't just walk into someone's house, like, so like if you think of like these spaces have many guardians that are maybe in the wells or in the trees, and both seen and unseen, so it's really beautiful to come and to introduce yourself and share why it is that you feel called to go somewhere, and also to really, I suppose, drop into and listen to where are you called to go, because like there's so many spaces and sites and places, but we only have so much time on a linear level as well. So it's really good, I think, to drop into like, where am I actually called to? And then when you go to introduce yourself, and it's really beautiful if you can to introduce yourself in song, even if it's like singing your name, or just bringing a prayer or a song to the space, and then your offerings of flowers or oats or waters, and that way you're really honoring the ones who have tended to that space, and you're creating space to include them, in your experience there, and in that way, I suppose it's also just that flow of reciprocity, which is also connected with all of what then follows, I suppose, and moves through you, is as a channel, as a vessel, is you're in communion, so that's communicating with them. So to do that, like, you need to have the space and have a sense of safety in you, and like there's so many people on the lands now and all over the world that are on these journeys, and that are very happy to facilitate spaces for people who have a calling to journey in some way with the land, with the waters, with the songs or the stories or the fire, and you can do that then in a way where you're guided by someone who can, maybe bring you back if you go off into a journey, and and you need grounding. Like, we all need support along the way, and I think it's really important to remember that and to call upon it, because sometimes there's like a line of people there, usually just like really ready to welcome and support you, but we really need to ask them. And I think that's the same with our guardians, it's just really asking for that support and trusting, but that's also, I suppose, a journey to healing what is within us, and first, because that has to happen first, really
first, but then also like conjunctively, like also at the same time, because I feel like, I love in what you're sharing, these threads of like, yes, there's this like sort of really subtle wisdom, magic, power, aliveness, whatever we want to call it, that kind of wants to like express itself through life, through the things that exist, right? And so in the way that it's in places where it's still intact, that is anchored in the land, in the same way, like our soul and the things we channel have to like anchor through our body. And so, yes, some of our work is becoming clearer and clearer channels, but it's like we don't become clearer and clearer channels so that our human self completely disappears, we become clearer channels so that our human self is the purest expression of what wants to move through us, like in the way that we're meant to bring it forth. And so, your way might be song, and my way might be something else, and someone else's is going to be something else, and so like each of those are meant to have those different flavors. And that's some of what I think you're pointing to, in that like when we ask permission, we get called to the sites where we're meant to go, so that we connect with the energies that want to help us become the purest channel in our like way. And so, yeah, we have to kind of prepare ourselves for that. Like I remember I was hiking out in the Sedona area out in Arizona, and there was a trail there, a lesser known trail that is actually still a sacred site, that leads to what's still a sacred site for some of the indigenous peoples in that area. And I was on that trail, and I mean, I could just feel the power of it, like all the ancestors, and so I had come with my offerings, and I introduced myself, and I asked permission, and felt like, is it okay for me to walk this trail to this site, and I felt the permission and the care of all of the ancestors. It was some birthing caves. And I mean, it was like the whole 2-mile walk to the hike to the caves were lined with these female ancestors, like every woman who had given birth in those caves before. It was incredible. And I remember getting to those caves and just like, like holding back and like, just kind of being really respectful. And there was a woman also there who was just like tromping around and taking pictures. And she just kept saying like, oh my gosh, can't you feel how sacred this is? This is so amazing. And it was just such an awareness moment for me to be like, oh yes, that's right. We can feel things are sacred and still not know how to hold them as sacred and like treat them as sacred. And so much of that is because we don't know how to hold ourselves as sacred, and we don't know how to hold our own bodies as sacred. And so how on earth are we going to actually treat the land as sacred? And so that's where, like, yeah, there's some prep work I feel like we have to do before we can really come in a good way to these places, these sacred sites. And yet at the same time, part of then the journey in being in those sacred sites is realizing like, oh, the limit to which I can be with this place as sacred, or be with this myth as sacred, or be with this song as sacred, also points to the limit at which I hold myself and my own body as sacred, because that's like, those eternal beings, the Tuatha Dé Danann, and the, sort of that like, that magic power energy, whatever we want to call it, right, is anchored to the land in the same way that our souls are anchored to our bodies, right? And then like the song and the language and how we speak and how we sing, and the stories we tell, that's like that meeting point. That's where we get into vibration and frequency, and like how we connect actually, sort of the material with that more subtle world, and so that's part of why I think like, some of what you're pointing to, like the coming back to as original a language as we can, like a language that's as connected with the earth, the place where we live, as we can, or, the songs, and even if it's just toning and making silly sounds, but it's like, that's frequency is the language that anyone and everything can speak. Rocks speak frequency, trees speak frequency, birds speak frequency, bugs speak frequency, like everything speaks frequency. And so that's part of why, I think that song, singing or toning as a way of introducing ourselves, to a place, it's amazing how much when I start singing to the land, like how I feel it welcome me in a different way. Like I feel a different relationship like click into place.
Yeah, really beautifully said. Yeah, it is. And that's it, isn't it? It's like it's bringing that bridging energy again of those two pieces. It's like the heaven and earth dance, that happens when we sit in circle around the fire and we sing. And it is really that simple. It's like, it's actually, there's layers of complexity in terms of healing and like making the space, so that can take a while. We might have quite a lot, but that doesn't mean that it ends either. I mean, it definitely starts to feel lighter, but then also, you need to continue to go deeper, like, and that's where I am in my journey. Like, there's no part of me that thinks that, oh, I am done now, and I'm, songs and everything's grand, like I still find myself in floods of tears, and I'm so grateful that I can cry, that I'm able to release it, and that it can come through me, and that also, though, that I'm able to do that now and not get so in my head about the story about it, though, as well, because that can be a part that can hold us back, actually. So I think if anyone is listening to this and like identifies with that kind of feeling of like being really overwhelmed and upset about things that happen, like, and it's really important to honor and value the story and what we've experienced, because that's all really valid, but also it's like finding a way to move through it and out into the lightness of it. And often we need people to guide us with that, because we can only go in my journey, you can only go really so deep on your own. And then you really need somebody to witness you, and that's really what it is, like it's, that is also like, it's like we don't either need someone to fix us or a magic wand, it's like we actually really need to be seen in it,
and held.
Like that's it, like someone just watches us and sees us. And like that was a big piece of how I came to do what I'm doing now with the song journeys, is because I found myself so blessed to be around the fires and sitting at wells, and I was, as the songs were coming in and more I was sharing them and feeling how people really received a lot from them, and how much like I was deepening in my own trust in myself and in what was coming through me from sharing them. And this whole journey, that was happening. And then also realizing that like not everybody gets to sit around the fire and journey in this way, but there are people who nevertheless are out for a walk with their dog and they're receiving a song from the land, because the land is singing, and in particular places it really hums and sings, because there's been so many prayers and ceremonies, and and I feel that within Ireland, that like the Tuatha Dé Danann and the ones that walk this earth, that they really imbued the land with their songs and with these codes of remembrance. They're really present in the land and in the waters, and when we go there in that way, in reverence, I feel that that's what's happening often, is that we're channeling actually these really ancient melodies, and like I've had people say to me before, like, I've heard this song before, like I know that like my body knows this song, and I know this melody, but also there is that imbas piece, is like that there's wisdom coming in now that we need for these moments, to midwife us through these situations and through the grief, and that will help us to release the tears, and let go of the shame and all of the emotions that are maybe just holding us back a little bit from like fully expressing our whole wild selves, so yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. So I'm aware that you're I don't know if you, well, I should ask it more as a question. Are you still feeling called to share a song to kind of close us out?
Yeah.
So then before we kind of jump into that, then I want to offer you, and I'll put your website and your not your website, your Instagram and things like that in the, and email or whatever in the show notes. But yeah, if you would like to kind of briefly, share how people can connect you, or if you have an offering coming up, I think you do, that if you want to invite anybody to join you on that. And then I think, we'll kind of let the song sort of close us out. And
okay. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. So firstly, I just want to go much more giving thanks to you, Kate, for this beautiful space and this vision that you walk with. Just, you really are a visionary woman, and it's been an honor to journey with you with the songlines. And yeah, to be a guest here with you in this space is also really special. So yeah, really honoring that vision and integrity that you walk with. And yeah, for your listening and reflections, like I feel like these spaces are really potent places where we actually deepen in our knowing of what it is we walk with and what it means, what it emanates. So Gur Mila Mahaga, thank you so much for having
Mila
um
Buikos.
Mila Buikos, yeah. Yeah, and so yeah, I offer things through Instagram usually. That's kind of my main space to share. And yeah, I offer one-to-one sessions, and I also offer the containers as they come. So the next one does begin on the 10th of May, which is a Wednesday.
Coming up.
And yeah, it'll be 4 weeks of gathering. I think it's at 7 or something around that time in the evening Irish time. And really, this is like, I suppose, connected very much so to our conversation, inspired by the knowingness that we are all channels and vessels, and that our body is our most sacred instrument. Because we have all these instruments, like I have a drum and I have all these things, but like really, if I don't know how to use my own instrument, really I'm kind of like maybe leaning on them, or not quite like optimizing this vessel that I walk with. So yeah, so it's going to be a journey through connecting with our root. So all of what I offer is very much so grounded in us rooting down, and that's like connecting with the landscape, but also connecting with our lineages and our ancestors, our guides, and bringing that energy up then from the rooted place and connecting with our whole body through toning and embodiment practices. But really, this journey will be about mostly the root, the heart, and then the voice as the expression for when that channel is flowing well, then that is happening in such an effortless way. So yeah, we'll be meandering with the muses, so really connecting with what it is that really moves us, whether it's sitting at the water or being in the forest. And we'll go on imbas journeys that I guide, and I'll share medicine songs of the land, and yeah, we'll share and really be in community, very much so. Like this space, I suppose it's like I always see us as actually being in circle and around the fire. And although it's happening through the internet, we can access those spaces through this medium. And yeah, it's amazing to be able to do that and connect with people across the waters, who have connections with Ireland and have connections with the ancestry here. So yeah, and then very briefly, I will be doing like a songlines pilgrimage in Ireland. So that's starting on the 28th of May down in Sanctor in Cork. And a friend is making a poster at the moment. But so there'll be a weaving of going from different counties and to different wells and retreat spaces. And there'll be like half-day retreats, which will be very similar, except for we'll be just weaving more with the landscape in a very tangible, like on the land way, and singing songs and yeah. And also just to say about You're the Vessel journey, and all of the journeys are very much so connected with us also sharing our songs, because as I mentioned earlier, that was a big part of the inspiroid, the imbas for me, was like, oh, like there must be loads of people who are receiving songs, but and I really wanted to hear them and like have a space where we could share them. So yeah, in all of the circles, there's an invitation for you to share a song or a melody or something that's alive, and to be witnessed in that. And that's really where the deep healing, I feel, happens. So yeah,
Thank you.
I think that's mostly, I mean, I could say a few more things, but sure, the people can find me on Instagram if they want to
Perfect.
find out. Like, we're coming into Bealtaine, or you're like, oh yeah, actually there's a festival, Manifestival though is a festival happening the week after Bealtaine, because I think this will go live before that. So if anyone is in Ireland and is listening to this or is coming to Ireland, that's going to be a beautiful gathering of many of the tribe of the Tuatha, and it's happening in Bealtaine Park for the whole weekend. Lots of different workshops, and it's an alcohol and drug-free gathering as well. So that's that. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Will I share the song? So
Please. Yeah.
okay. So so this one I'm going to share is Aisling Éiriú. It's came through last year in a field over the hills from Uisneach, in the very much so the same townland area. And so yeah, Aisling is the Irish for vision, and Éiriú, as mentioned earlier, is the goddess of sovereignty. So this song is really a celebration and a prayer of the vision of Éiriú and the vision and the dream of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the tribe of Danu. And in the song, we call upon the elements Shanna, her Chinna, grandfather fire, Talún Bio, the living land, Ishka Nefa, the sacred waters, and Weha Kanasu, which is the healing winds. Oh, Oh,
Mm. Mm. Mille buicos.
Mille buíochas.
Yeah. So we'll just let the wisdom of that song the medicine of that song be with us. And so I just invite everybody listening to just kind of take a couple deep breaths in and out and just notice the ripples of that song, the frequency, the sound kind of moving through you in whatever way it does. A prayer that we remember land as kin, as elder, as ancestor, that we remember safety and belonging in our bodies and to place, to people, to language, to fire, to water, to wind. And so thank you everyone for tuning in to this episode. And we'll hope to see you next time around the fire.
Slangafol.
Slangafol. Hi, Kate here again. Thank you for gathering with us. Whether you've been here a while or found your way here thanks to today's guest, it means so much to me and the world I dream of to have you here. I hope you'll tune in for more of our conversations. We humans seem to be at a profound threshold and facing questions of deep impact for the future and the world. We need our full hearts and humanity as we sow seeds of change in these times of joy and heartbreak. I count myself lucky to be here now, around this virtual village fire, weaving our stories into a medicine with humans like you. As a community medicine space, this podcast is relational. It weaves webs of connection and mutual respect and care across time and space. If you appreciate and support the future we're seeding here, you can support the weaving of this web in a few ways. 1, share episodes with friends and family or online with your community. It also helps the podcast immensely if you like, rate, subscribe to, or follow the podcast where you watch or listen, so you get notified when new episodes drop and new listeners find us as they search. 2, join us on Patreon. Doing so supports conversations like the one you just heard and allows you access to live community gatherings and medicine circles and more as we continue to grow. It also helps me keep the space advertisement-free so the conversations stay intact as they are. If you have questions, suggestions, connections, or would like to find out more about working with me, you can find me online at www.wildsacredjourney.com, on Instagram at wildsacredjourney_KP, or email me, kate@wildsacredjourney.com. Until next time, from my heart to yours, I release today's fire with a prayer for our individual and collective wholeness, connection, and joy. May it be so.